Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first podcast of the ThisWeek Sports Roundtable. We're live on Facebook, and we're recording our first sports podcast for ThisWeekSports.com. I'm copy editor Andy Resnick, and I'll be your host for this inaugural episode, during which we're going to preview the high school football season. I'm sure you remember that only one team from Central Ohio, Pickerington Central, won a state championship last season, and we'll explore whether anyone has what it takes to win it all this season. We'll also break down league races and discuss the top players in Central Ohio. We have a lot to tackle in the next half hour or so let's get started by introducing our panel.
Hi, I'm Brad Emmerine, and you can follow me at Brad at ThisWeek.
This is Jared Ulrey. You can follow me at Ulrey this week, U-L-R-E-Y this week.
Sports writer Dave Papura. I'm on Twitter at ThisWeekDave.
Hi, I'm Scott Hennon. I'm at This Week Hennon.
Hi, I'm Frank Durena. You can follow me at This Week Frank.
So I think the best place to begin our discussion is with our predictions for the best teams and best players in Central Ohio. We'll have a Super 7 poll each week during the regular season at ThisWeekSports.com to recognize the top teams, beginning with the preseason Super 7. And at the end of the season, we'll name our Super 25 team for our top players. So which teams and players seem like locks to stand out?
Well, I think it'd be logical to start with Pickerington Central, and I know we're going to get a chance to talk about them later as well when we talk about the OCC Ohio. And they're a team that's lost, they lost a lot of guys last year. They lost Xavier Henderson and, several linemen. I mean, they lost a lot of their lineman graduation on offense. But they got Demetri Crenshaw back, and I'm sure we're going to talk about him some. And their defensive line, they're going to make it really, really tough for anybody to move the ball on them because they've got not only Dwayne Carter, but they got Carter Johnson. Here's a couple of guys, both major Division I college recruits, and so I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of times, they are at the top of the mountain, and there are a lot of state champions. You lose a ton of guys after that. You mentioned some important guys that aren't there, but boy, they seem to have many important guys back this year, and that's why I tend to believe that they're not going to take much of a drop off. And they play another tough schedule. Again, they open against a team from Chicago. I think it's a week from Sunday.
They got two defending state champs in their first 3 weeks, I believe. So.
And Indiana, I think, is the other one. A team from Indiana, yeah. And Trotwood. Okay, there you go. And obviously their league schedule that we're going to talk a lot about. But yeah, I like them first. Obviously Hartley's going to be one of those teams too, I think.
Well, it's very hard to repeat, and even though they have a lot of the same players back, it's still not the same chemistry. I mean, you lose seniors, and a lot of times behind the scenes, they're the ones rattling the cages in the locker room, getting people ready to play. Sometimes when younger players come up and have to step into that leadership role, it's not as easy. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here,
And they probably do go into the season with a target on their back, and I'm sure Coach Sherritt appreciates that and looks forward to that challenge.
I know, and we'll talk about Hilliard Bradley later, but they're kind of in that same boat, right? They lost a lot of guys, and they're going to, they've really come a long way here the last couple of years, coming off a 10-0 regular season, and the way they've developed players here is very impressive the last couple of years.
Yeah, Coach Mike Laparo, he seems to think that they're in a reload mode. I mean, they can bring players up that play JV and can step into roles, people who've been biding their time. One such player is the quarterback, Griffin Vale. He come in the last two series against Pick Central in the playoff game, scored 2 touchdowns. I mean, he's a winner. He was undefeated in middle school, lost one game as a freshman, and he's been on varsity the last 2 years, and they've lost a total of 3 games. So should be interesting to see how that stacks up.
What about Pickerington North?
Well, I know there's another publication in the state of Ohio that thought maybe Pickerington North might be the best team in Central Ohio this year. I mean, I don't know how you can really say that with what Pickerington Central's done the last few years, but it's logical to think they're going to be very good. I mean, they have their quarterback that started for them as a freshman, Michael Lowry. They've got an excellent sophomore, Jack Sawyer. I mean, this kid he's going to be really special. He's already really, really good. And they got a tight end who's a Division I recruit, Tyler Foster. Pickerington North they'll be an excellent team again, I would think.
So basically, I mean, we know that the two Pickerington teams are probably going to be two of the top 7 if, you know, we do a Super 7 each week. So let's try to maybe come up with, you know, 4, 5, 6 other teams that we think could crack that top 7.
Well, the Dublin Kaufman, I mean, they always seem to be in the hunt. They have a new quarterback, transferred from Marysville before his sophomore year, and he's going to be starting as a senior this year. But he has some great talent around him. I mean, there's Mike Drennan, who's a slot back, you know, running back / wide receiver. He has offers from all of the MAC schools, most of the Big Ten schools, some SEC schools. He's the real deal. He missed all but 4 games last year with a foot injury. And then A.J. Kirk, you might have heard of his stepbrother, Michael Doss, played for Ohio State and I believe the Colts. He's only a sophomore and he's an impact player in the defensive backfield.
Well, Drennan's the one who made that one-handed catch, right? That was on SportsCenter Top Plays.
Oh yeah, he's an incredible player.
How about Olentangy Liberty? I'm sorry. Yeah, how about Olentangy Liberty too? And they got Mitchell Oakley back as their quarterback. They've got lots of program players. Maybe we'll talk about them a little bit later too. They got a lot of veterans and they have huge numbers and they have a huge offensive line.
Whenever they play Orange, and I don't remember what the date is, probably I assume it's down toward the end of October. I mean, that's going to be a gigantic game, as it would be anyway. I mean, and obviously Olentangy's hoping to figure in there as well. You know, you look at Olentangy, they lost quite a few of their younger level kids to Berlin. They have a quarterback coming back who started as a sophomore, did not start last year in Connor Haig. Although Coach Solis told me, I think it was Tuesday night when I was working on their Week 1 preview, that could be a dead heat. With him and a senior who's going for time as well. Jace Middleton is a sophomore receiver who's very good. Ian Drummond is a senior tight end. You know, they're going to be very good for them as well. You mentioned Kaufman a minute ago. Another team in that division that I cover is Upper Arlington, and they've got some experience back along the lines. They've got a senior quarterback, Sammy Sass, and not to take away from talking about the division later, but they're a team that potentially, you know, if they get Reynoldsburg in Week 1, if they get a win against them, they've beat up their non-conference schedule. I think they might figure into that top 7 at some point later in the year.
And I don't think you can sleep on Hilliard Davidson. Even though they didn't make the playoffs last year, Coach White really likes his linebackers and thinks they can get back in the playoff picture this year.
And
Well, is there any, like, these are all the traditional teams that we often talk about, or that we, you know, is there anybody that we're sleeping on? Is there a dark horse out there? I mean, often sometimes, you know, like Hartley or DeSales will break into our Super 7.
Yeah, as they should, and well deserved.
Dave, what do you think about Canal Winchester?
I was going to talk more about them with the league later, but I do think that they will give New Albany a run for their money. They've got a ton of their kids back from that team that made the playoffs last year. They had to replace some important positions, and I don't know if they're in that top 7 yet in the area, but they're certainly going to contend in their league.
Well, yeah, Orange isn't really a sleeper, I don't think, but we really didn't mention him. I mean, you know, you have the top recruit in Ohio, probably the Midwest, and Zach Harrison, just a beast on the defensive line. But he was a tight end. This year they're going to move him into the slot H-back position. He's going to be running the ball, and when you're 6'6", 245 pounds with sprinter speed, that's going to take some people down.
But he's a defensive recruit. I mean, he's going to be defensive end in college.
Yeah, but Coach Schroeder said that they needed to use him as much as possible. Yeah, he's a beast on the defensive line.
You are listening to the first podcast of the ThisWeek Sports Roundtable, and we're previewing the high school football season. Our Central Ohio High School football preview guide will be available next week in your August 19th edition of the Dispatch, or your August 23rd edition of This Week. You also can pick up a copy at Central Ohio Roosters locations. The guide includes previews of 75 teams, a story on the top players, and a special feature on an area power. So why don't we move in and talk about some of these individual leagues. With 32 teams, a great deal of our coverage focuses on the OCC. We've talked about things a little bit, but I think we should dive in by putting defending Division I state champion Pickerington Central and the powerhouse OCC Ohio division under the microscope. So can the Tigers win at least a share of their 13th consecutive league title? Who can challenge them in the OCC Ohio? and the Tigers win the state title again. I think we should start with Jared. He covers the Pick Central, Pick North, Reynoldsburg, Gahanna. So,
well, I was talking to somebody that's close to the program, and he was saying he was talking to Coach Sherritt a couple weeks ago, and Coach Sherritt told him this last year. He's like, I think we can be scary good. He said that last year. Apparently, he's behind the scenes. Maybe he's saying some things kind of like that this year too. That he thinks they can be scary good, and I think that that's very possible. I mean, they not only have Crenshaw back, but they got their running back, Jameer Jackson, and then those defensive linemen that I talked about. But the other thing is that they've had, over the last 2 seasons, they've had 9 extra weeks where they've practiced, and that's going to get a lot of your sophomores like Lorenzo Stiles Jr. He's going out there where he had a lot of extra practice time here the last couple of years. There's lots of guys who are going to benefit from that. And then after that, I mean, I think it is actually going to be a real battle between Pickerington North and Reynoldsburg. And I know we kind of touched on Reynoldsburg just very briefly, but their team has got, I believe they've got 5 Division I recruits out of their senior class. Now they've always, the last few years, they've just kind of been on the cusp. They made the playoffs back in, I believe, 2015. And then the last couple years, they just came up just a little bit short. I think there's a real opportunity for them to maybe step forward here and battle for this, battle for second or first in the league. I think there's a real opportunity.
Well, sorry, what about with Lowry transferring from Gahanna back to Pick North? I mean, you've got one of the best quarterbacks in the area joining North, but also Gahanna now losing one of the best quarterbacks in the area.
Well, Gahanna has, I see kind of Gahanna and Lancaster being in this situation where they're both going to be very dangerous. Can they beat one of those teams and get into the playoffs? I think that's going to be the big thing that they need to try to do. They need to win, and they need to probably both go 3-2 or 4-1 in their non-league schedules. And I think that's possible. I mean, Gahanna's got a very tough schedule, a very tough non-league schedule. So, you figure if they can go 3-2 in the league or 2-3 in the league and then maybe go 4-1 in the non-league, they're going to have a real shot to make the playoffs. And Lancaster's Lancaster. I mean, we know what you're going to get from them. They're going to be physical. They're going to run the ball almost every play, and they're not trying to hide it. That's what they are, and they know it. And I know that they've beaten Pickerington Central more than any team in the OCC Ohio over the last 16 years. So,
Frank, we haven't talked about Grove City yet. So I know they're kind of rebuilding. So what are your thoughts about them?
Well, I know Coach Varney in his second season, he believes that if that's not the toughest division in Ohio, then there isn't a tough one around. And I know he understands he's got a young team. He might struggle this season, but he's just hoping that they can be competitive with some of those teams, those tough teams in Ohio.
Well, and you mentioned that. It's a good point to know. I mean, Pickerington Central got through and won state last year, but there were very few games that they just ran away and hid from people. Lancaster gave them a great game. Pick North gave them a great game. I don't remember what the score of the Reynoldsburg game was offhand, but I mean that competition makes them better. And honestly, I mean, just looking at these notes, I'm kind of jealous that you're going to get to see North a lot. I think they could be a very fun team to watch.
Oh,
So you mentioned Lowry. Jalen Baylor's a good receiver who's getting a lot of big looks. Chris Scott, Tyler Foster, you mentioned him going down to Ohio University, I believe.
Right.
And that's not to mention Jack Sawyer as well. And Reynoldsburg, with those 5 D1 guys, one of them was added in Jeremiah Burton, who came down from Westerville North. He's on their defensive line. And then I think a fair amount of those D1 guys are on the lines. I know that's something that Upper Arlington's coach was telling me the other night when I was talking to him for the preview. That's going to be a huge test for them, and that's why I think they're going to be so good.
It's such a battle every time one of these teams play each other, and I don't mean that from a from a cliche standpoint, but a physical. It's always a very physical battle. I know Gahanna last year, I think they might have left the Pickerington Central game with like 2 or 3 injuries. I mean, it's just the games are always very physical because the lines are all so good and so big.
Why don't we move on to the OCC Capital, where we've got Canal Winchester and New Albany coming off playoff appearances, and the Eagles have a new coach. So how do you guys see that race shaking out? And why don't we start with Dave, because he covers New Albany and Canal Winchester.
I think it's going to be really interesting. Those two teams meet to start the league schedule. I want to say, without looking, it's around the 28th of September, if I get my dates right. And New Albany beat Canal last year, later ended up losing to Big Walnut, and that's what ultimately created the tie at the top of the league. New Albany having a new head coach, they were very quick to emphasize, the rest of the coaches are still there with the exception of a quarterback. Well, everybody is still there, and then they brought a new guy up from the freshman level to coach the quarterbacks. They still got Micaiah Burton, who ran for 1,200 yards last year. He's going to be their featured back. They have a new quarterback because the previous one, who was a multi-threat, graduated. Will King is a defensive end heading to Akron. He's going to anchor their defense very nicely. I picked them for our preseason tab because they're the king of the hill until somebody knocks them off. Well, if anybody's going to knock them off, I think it's Canal, because they bring back their quarterback. They lost some receivers, but they bring back a ton of guys on the line. They have a running back, Darren Davis, who was a second-team All-State linebacker last year. So, they're looking to get off to a big start in the second year for their coach down there. I think they have a very good chance, not just to win the league, but to make the playoffs, and not just get in with the 8th seed like they had last year, but maybe be in that 4 to 7 range.
My question would be, would Franklin Heights be able to get in this discussion with Cody Littleback? I don't know.
Very well could be. Very well could be. It's funny, Cody Little had such a great season last year, and they have a lot back with him, and it'll be amazing to see what they can do. I think they have a lot of talent, and the Capital, it usually is between, a New Albany race, but Canal's at it, and I would also think Franklin Heights would be in that picture.
Well, Big Walnut too. They're still going to be in there as well. They lost some important guys. They lost to Nate Myers, but they bring 6 stars back on defense.
And Brad, you cover Groveport, so can you give us a scouting report on the Cruisers?
Yeah, Brian Schoonover, their coach, is switching from the spread offense. They're going to start running the wing T, and of course he was an assistant at Lancaster for a long time, and so he knows the ins and outs of that. And he thinks that their personnel is a whole lot better suited for the wing T. And I know they've got quite a few guys back defensively. They probably have a couple guys that are going to go on and play college football, whether it's Division I or Division II, I'm not sure. But along the line, they've got some pretty good linemen defensively. They still had a lot of battles going on. Offensively, they were thinking about, with the switch of the new offense, one of their freshman receivers, Akins, he might be a quarterback this year. So they're switching things all around. They still had 3 quarterbacks vying. Their offense seemed to have a lot of question marks, but the defense is probably going to be pretty good.
I think Newark will be better too. They had a lot of things go wrong last year, a lot of injuries and just a lot of off the field type stuff. And I think that they'll be better. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that, but I think that they'll be better.
So let's move on to the OCC Cardinal. We've got an 8th team coming in. It's a little unbalanced now, and we've got a realignment. I'm sure that'll be coming in a couple years. I'm sure maybe we'll have a podcast at some point just devoted to the realignment. So we've got an 8th team in that league now. We've got with the opening of Olentangy Berlin, and the Bears kick off their inaugural season August 24th at home against Briggs. Scott Hennon not only covers Bradley, he covers Berlin. We've said that Bradley won the league last year. They lost in the second round of the playoffs to Pick Central, and the Jaguars have lost several key players. So, is Bradley the favorite? What do you see, Scott?
Well, I really think this race might be wide open. I think the 2 Dublin schools are in there. Jerome and Scioto, I think they have a good shot. Worthington Kilbourne often flexes its muscles as well. Berlin, it's a new school. There's going to be a lot of pomp and circumstance when they start, because they seem to have a parade for everything. But it'll be interesting. They've got young kids. These kids were, they're senior. Their seniors are juniors because they don't have a senior class. We're talking about kids that are still 16 years old leading the team, leading the charge, and sometimes that's difficult. And they have 16-year-old bodies. They're not always the biggest. But, then you got Bradley. Bradley, they have a couple of Division I recruits for linebacker. They have Cannon Glauser, who's
Love that. That's a great first name, by the way.
well, especially for a linebacker.
Yeah.
And he's going to OU. And then you have Zach Hummel, who's going to UC. They're both really fast. Hummel is an H-back on offense. He does a lot there for them. They have Trey Warner back, who's a great receiver for the past 2 years. They're loaded, but you know, I'm sure Frank can tell you more about Jerome and Scioto.
Well, we were talking about sleeper teams earlier, and Dublin Scioto might be one of those teams. And Coach Johnson really didn't say a lot, but deep down, I think he thinks this could be a special team this year with quarterback Kyron Rogers, a couple key defensive players in Casey Pfeiffer and Logan Williams. And I think Scioto might be one of those surprise teams, and not only the Cardinal, but also in the Super 7.
What about Jerome?
Jerome lost a lot to graduation, but you know, Coach Deswich has been there 4 years. He's had 3 winning seasons, so I mean, he's doing something right there. But he thinks his team might struggle at first, but as the season goes on, might improve, might get better.
Well, while we're talking about the Cardinal, I should mention that you know, every Thursday during the season, and that is from week 1 until the state championship games, assuming we have a team playing for one, that we'll be doing Facebook Live every Thursday around usually 3:30, going to a different school every week. And so a week from now, for week 1, the plan is that we are going to Berlin to preview not just their game against Briggs, but you know, talk about the top games of week 1. And I think it'll be nice to go, and we went to a lot, tried to go to different schools last year and not repeat many. We repeated a couple, you know, like Pick Central. But I think it'll be nice to go to Berlin, go to a new school, talk to a coach that we've never met with before. You have. So we didn't talk about Delaware yet.
Or the Worthingtons. Right?
Well, we mentioned Scott mentioned Kilbourne, but we've got Scott Wetzel, who won a state title at Big Walnut, going from Westerville North to Delaware to replace Mike Golden. And then you also covered Thomas, which won 4 games last year. So why don't you offer up some stuff on those 2 teams?
Well, I want to talk about 4 of them real quickly. Kilbourne, I think, is going to be pretty much improved. I think they have a nice offensive lineman in Sam Schick. They've got a returning quarterback in Grayson Timms. And they've got a game breaker, if they can ever get him free, Elijah Young at running back. And coaches tell me that they really worked hard in the weight room all off season. And he thinks that they're going to come out and be more physical. And they're also going to change what they're doing a little bit. They're not going to run as wide as often. They want to run right at you and use the strength that they've added in the weight room. And Delaware's in the same situation. Scott Wetzel, he told me one of the first things that he noticed when he came in there was how much the kids loved the weight room. He said they were in there constantly. It was like he had to kick them out and say, "Hey guys, it's time to go." So they're pretty excited about what they can do over there, and I do. I think they'll be improved. I don't know how much that'll show in the record. I know that they're going to be. I have a feeling they're going to be a much better football team. And I think the whole league is going to be better from top to bottom than it's been in a while. Because I don't think that bottom team is going to be very bad, no matter who that is. Thomas Worthington, you were talking about their head coach, Matt Zingery, and he seems pretty excited because he's able to put in a lot more of the, install a lot more of the offense and defense than what they had last year. He wasn't a hire right before the season began, but after going through a full year, you know a little bit more. Unfortunately, he's got a lot of young kids now that he's trying to install this new stuff with. They had a lead in probably 4 games last year where they lost in the final 3 or 4 minutes. They lost a lot of close games, and you know they basically they could have been 8-2 had they turned those around, all of them. So they're going to be very competitive, I believe. So I think the entire league is going to be a whole lot better.
Okay. Well, let's jump over to the OCC Central. We've mentioned some of the traditional powers, Kaufman, Davidson, UA, but looking at last year, Kaufman was the only playoff team. Davidson missed the playoffs, which is really rare, we know. So, I mean, what do we have in store for the OCC Central this year? Is Davidson trying to get back to the playoffs? Is that the biggest storyline?
I think it's one of the biggest storylines. First time in 10 years not making the playoffs. It's usually not heard of there, but I think with their defense, they have a really good shot to maybe get back to the postseason. I know he's still concerned. Coach White's concerned about the offense, not catching up with the defense yet, but he's really enthused about his defense.
And they're going to pass the ball, right?
Yeah, maybe once,
Yeah.
twice.
So Scott, you cover Kaufman, so we've talked about him a little bit, but I mean, are they looking at a repeat, back to the playoffs?
Well, I got a quick question for Frank. Frank, what happened the last time Davidson didn't make the playoffs?
Well, they won the state title the following year, I believe.
If that is correct. I was surprised you didn't bring that up. Well, Kaufman, they have a lot of speed, as I mentioned before, and that's really their signature this year. With Kirk and Drennan, they have others. They lost a lot, but they have some new kids, and it's their time to step in and step up and get the job done when they have their chance. Coach Crabtree's pretty optimistic that they'll be able to do that. The big thing on their defense, last year, they had a very young defensive backfield, and the front seven were the staple. They were all seniors pretty much, and they led the way. This year, the defensive backs had that year of experience, and they've grown, and he expects that to be the leading force on the defense for the Shamrocks this year.
Then you have Upper Arlington. That's what they want to be in that top three as well. The big thing is they've got to get over the hump against the two teams that you guys cover, Kaufman and Davidson. They've struggled against them in recent years, and ultimately that's cost them going to the playoffs. They have a quarterback back, Sammy Sass, who's a baseball commit to Wright State. This will be his second year under center. They've got some good talent back on the lines too. Judd Utgard is an offensive lineman. He's going to go to Brown. Jackson Ness is a two-way lineman who's going to Boston College. They've got three of their linebackers back. They've got to bring some guys in some of the skill positions. They've got a tough schedule, though. I mean, we alluded to earlier, they open against Reynoldsburg. Then they play Findlay, who's a new one. They play Cincinnati Winton Woods, who's a new team on the schedule. Westerville South, Lancaster should be a really tough test for them. And then they get into OCC Central play with Westland. But yeah, for me, ultimately, it boils down to how do they play against those two teams. And I think that's going to dictate the course of their season.
And Marysville might surprise some people. Second-year coach Brett Johnson, he's got his quarterback back. Who's Walker Hurd. He's got a lineman who's getting looks and for wrestling and for football, and Tyler Conley. So they might be a surprise team.
There's one OCC division left, and that's the Buckeye. And we have the three Olentangy schools minus Berlin, so Orange, Liberty, and the original Olentangy, and the three Westervilles, Central, North, and South. And last year, Liberty reached Division I state semifinal. Olentangy and Orange made the playoffs. So are those three still the class, or are any of the Westervilles ready to take the next step? We have a coaching change at Westerville Central and at North. Maybe Jared, since Liberty won the league last year, you started off.
I would think that Liberty is probably the favorite going in. They've got Mitchell Oakley back at quarterback. Yes, they lost. They lost a few guys, but this is a program that's been to back-to-back state semifinals, not just last year.
Yeah.
So they really have a good grasp of what they need to do. They've also got. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but they've got a really, really big offensive line, and they got a lot of experience on the offensive line too. And then they've got. It doesn't look like they're going to have Ben Roderick this year. They're not really sure. I think that optimistically they'd like to think maybe he'd come back at some point, but his future is probably in college basketball, so they probably won't rush him back. And in this case, they have a roster 10 through 12 that I believe has over 100 boys, 10 through 12. So they're extremely deep. They've got other guys, they've got other options that I think can kind of fill the gap. And yeah, and just their experience, and I mean, it'll be really interesting. They start out the season with Pickerington North, so, and that's a team that, although Liberty had a great season last year, Pickerington North beat them 42-0. So this is going to be really, really interesting. How far have they closed the gap, since last year? I think that's going to be a real interesting test for them starting out.
Dave, you cover Olentangy and Westerville North, so.
I do want to say in one of my previews, I almost wrote the 3 Olentangy schools. No offense to Berlin or Berlin, however it's supposed to be pronounced, but that's something we're all going to have to wean ourselves off of. Olentangy, they returned so much on offense. Coach Solis was telling me when I was out there for the season preview last week that I hope my voice doesn't crack much more than that. That this offense could be every bit as good as the one in 2014 when that team went 13-0. And then they lost to Cincinnati LaSalle and Jeremy Larkin in the state semifinal. He's that excited about their offense. Defense, he says they're coming along as well. You mentioned Coach, actually no, I guess he wasn't mentioned by name. John Magistro, who was the Westerville Central coach, is now on Olentangy's staff with a couple other guys who came over from Central. And they're excited about what the defense is going to do. They're going from a 4-3 to a 3-4. So we'll see what that change brings them. You mentioned Westerville North as well, one of my other teams that I cover. Brian Johnson, who came over from Liberty Union, is really excited about working with these guys. Being a Westerville resident, a local guy, one thing he kept mentioning to me was stability, that he wants to be there long enough to really get a stable program together. And that's just not something they've had in the last couple of years. Roger Elander was there 3 years. Scott Wetzel was there only 2, and then he went to Delaware. So Johnson wants to really install a lot of stability up there. And they lost Burton to Reynoldsburg, Jeremiah Burton. But they do bring back a quarterback who's a junior who played some last year. KJ King is a big defensive end on the line, of course. He's a senior. And then they have some Rondale Smith, I think, is going to be their featured running back among some other guys. So, we'll see early on how it goes. They had some big wins earlier in the year, and then they really struggled in a very tough OCC Buckeye. So we'll see, how they gauge things for year one going forward.
And we have Frank, who covers Westerville Central and South. So Frank, since you grabbed the mic, why don't we deal with them, and then we'll jump over to Orange again, because let's kind of talk about that.
Well, Dave, you mentioned Central and Coach Magistro. I know Central's looking forward to that Week 10 game. Olentangy. John Magistro's long way to return, I guess. But new coach, Brett Morrison at Central, but he's been there several years as an assistant, so he don't miss too much of a beat with the new coaching staff. They have a really talented defensive end in Dante Hunter, who's been heavily recruited and has committed to Purdue. So he thinks the defense might be the strong point of his team this year. And with South, I guess is there life after Jalen Gill. Coach Chris thinks it might be more balanced this year, not heavily relying on just one person, led by Tavian Falls, who's looking to take Jalen's place in the slot. So I know Coach Chris is optimistic heading into the season.
Mansour is a nice playmaker for them,
yeah,
too.
Michael, very nice. Yeah, another slot.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott, we talked a little bit about Zach Harrison. Probably any Ohio State fan watching us on Facebook now or listening to us in the future on ThisWeekSports.com is going to be hoping that Zach Harrison commits to Ohio State. But this is a playoff team. They're more than Zach Harrison, so.
Yeah, well, especially on defense, they return their front 7, and Harrison is paired with another defensive end, Brant Keitlinger, who started last year, and he should be a force for him. He's also looking to play some on offense, the tight end area, and but they should be really strong. They have a lot of their line back, but they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do in the backfield. So that should be interesting. I think one of the biggest factors in this could come from the OCC Cardinal, and that's Berlin taking players, building their team from Liberty players, Olentangy, and Orange. Now, Orange, they didn't lose that many players. Liberty lost some, but boy, they just stole a lot, not stole. They,
Just the way the district is.
the way it was redistricted. A lot of their players came from Olentangy, and that could affect their depth. Depth is probably where it'll affect them most this year, and I think most teams are concerned about depth.
And that's a concern Olentangy has too in some areas as well.
Yeah. You're listening to the first, or watching on Facebook, podcast of the This Week Sports Roundtable, and we're previewing the high school football season. Our Central Ohio High School football preview guide will be available next week. And here I'm changing the script again to August 19th edition of the Dispatch.
That's great.
Because
They moved it up.
moved it up a day. Or your August 23rd edition of This Week, or you can pick up a copy at Central Ohio Greasers. Just pick up some napkins as well. And, so we've been talking about the OCC. We've got a lot of listeners, I'm sure, fans who follow the CCL. So there we've got Sales, Hartley, Reedy, kind of, St. Charles and Waterston. There's a lot of tradition with these schools and programs, although Hartley has been the dominant program in recent years, winning back-to-back Division IV state titles in 2015 and 2016. So where do these teams stand? Why don't we start with Jared, because he covers most of them.
Well, you mentioned Reedy. I'll just start with them real quick. Next year, I think the way that Coach Cross said it in the CCL Media Day next year, he said, next year either they're going to accept us or we're going to accept them. I'm not really sure, I think is what he said. So right now they're playing an MSL Ohio schedule, and they're also playing Hartley. And actually I think next year will be the first time in like over 50 years they're not going to play Hartley. They're going to go into some kind of 2-year rotation where they play the other CCL schools. But they're for all intents and purposes, next year they're going to be an MSL Ohio member, and I think that'll be a really competitive league for them. Now, as far as this year, they've got a lot of guys back. They got Austin Aiello back as their quarterback. They've got some linemen back. They got wide receiver back. The big key for them is, can they survive their early season schedule, because they opened with 3 playoff teams from last year, including this team Genoa, which they're playing on next Friday at Fortress Obitz. And then they play West Jefferson, which went 12-1 last year, and then they play Hartley. And Hartley is what they've been the last several years. They've got a program out there that just reloads year after year, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon. On paper, you might say, well, they've got an awful lot of juniors starting. I mean, they do. I mean, they have their quarterback as a junior this year, Miles Fleming. But if you ask Coach Birchfield, like, he's known Fleming since he was like in 5th grade or something. Like, he's already known for several years, hey, when Miles Fleming is a sophomore, junior, senior, he's probably going to be my quarterback. He's already known that for a long time. And they've got lots of other program guys like that, because he's got his hands all over a lot of those, he knows a lot of feeder schools out on the east side. A lot of those kids he knows are going to be coming to his school when they get to be in high school, and they've got this Philip Cole, who's an exceptional athlete. He's going to be really fun to watch this year. Hartley also has a very, very, very tough schedule this year. They open with Toledo Central Catholic, which is always really good. And then they play Wheelersburg, which hasn't lost a regular season game in, I think, 4 years or something. So if they start out 0-2 or 1-1, that doesn't mean that they're down. I can tell you that.
But didn't we say that last year? I mean, because they lost to Toledo Central Catholic.
And then they won like 9 in a row. Yeah,
exactly.
So,
they test themselves.
Well, speaking of, hate saying it, a program that might be down is Waterston, but that's maybe because of lack of numbers. As I was reading your preview that'll be in the guide.
Well, they're, I actually, yes, I mean, their numbers are not what they want. I think they've got 35 boys, grades 10 through 12. And they are coming off a 2-8 season, which they're not very happy about. Now, I do think that there's the potential for them to win more games than they did last year. It's going to be a challenge, because they're playing teams like Dublin Jerome. I mean, I believe they're playing 5 or 6 teams that made the playoffs last year, including Hartley. And one of those teams they play is Sales, which went 6-4 and didn't make the playoffs. But if they had made the playoffs, they probably would have been in a regional final against Hartley. I mean, they were really good. They just didn't. The combination of teams they played and the wins they got just didn't work out for them last year. So I think Waterston has the potential to be to be improved. I really do. And they're very high on their sophomore class. They've got a lot of sophomores that are playing key roles, and he's given his quarterback job probably to a sophomore this year. And then I guess, moving on to DeSales, they've got Rodas Johnson back, who we may have mentioned him earlier, may not have. He's got 26 Division I offers, and I think he's got it down to like a Final 5. I'm not sure he has an Ohio State offer, but I know he's been offered by Texas and Penn State and lots of schools like that, Michigan State. And they get him for the whole year this year. He only played the last 5 games of last season because he transferred, but they get him the whole season this year. And then they've also got Joey Velasquez, linebacker, running back, who used to be an Ohio State commit for baseball, but then he switched it, and now he's going to play football and baseball at Michigan. So he's a great athlete. So their big thing is they don't know who their quarterback is, and they are replacing. They did lose a lot of starters from last year, so they have some question marks, but I think there's a good chance that they'll be solid, very good.
Well, and when I was just looking over the notes in the CCL, my big question is, how much is DeSales closing in on Hartley? I mean, because we talked even before they played in that mammoth Week 8 that I think had every important matchup known to man in our coverage area last year. DeSales and Hartley ended up playing each other. Hartley won the game, so that to me makes me wonder. Have they gotten closer to Hartley?
That was like a 2-point game.
It was 23-21, and also one of the years that Hartley won the state title, DeSales beat them. So I'm not sure there's a ton of difference between them. I mean, I think you probably would think Hartley would be the favorite heading into the game. Whenever I think they play Week 8 again.
Mm-hmm. It's another huge week this year.
We'll see how it unfolds. It'll be a very competitive game.
We haven't talked about St. Charles. They've got a new coach.
Yeah, St. Charles, the seniors, they've had 3 coaches in their 4 years, so they probably are in a rebuilding mode under first year and first time coach Dee Coker. They've only won 3 games in the last 2 years, and they have a really tough schedule. So it could, and in that CCL, they might have a challenge this year.
Okay. As I mentioned before, we are taking a look at, we have 75 teams that we're previewing in our guide, and we can't discuss them all in this show because how are we going to fit in talking about 75 teams?
For another hour.
Yeah. But we have not looked at 3 other leagues that are teams that we preview that are in the preview guide, and that is City League, MSL, and LCL. So we'll do them one at a time, starting with the City League. Jared covers a bunch of City League teams. So why don't we start with their north or south, however you want to do it.
Well, with the City North, last year there was a 3-way tie for the title between Northland, Beechcroft, and Mifflin. I think all 3 of those teams will probably be among the top 4 again. I think that's pretty reasonable. Last year they tied for the title. I'm not sure that's going to happen. It's probably not going to happen again. I think on paper, Northland looks like the favorite right now. They got Khalil Branham and J.J. Branham back, and they're both really exceptional athletes, both going to go big-time Division I. They got Jesse Pruitt back, and they got Mark Lee back. They also have more numbers than most of the teams in the City North. Most of the teams in City North, 9 through 12, have, one of the teams only has 23 kids, and some of them are in the 30 to 35 range. Northland, I think, has got about 50-some. So that's a big. There's just a lot of numbers in the city are just a big struggle right now for everybody. But they have more than everybody else. So, and I think that Mifflin will be competitive. They've got a very good coaching staff over there. Anthony Thornton's been around a long time, so he's going to have them ready. And then Beechcroft is kind of they're a newer team. They have a new coach this year. So how will they be able to contend? I'm not really sure. I think we'll find out.
Brad, do you have anything to add on Centennial and Whetstone?
Yeah, speaking to both those guys and going out to their practices, yes, they are struggling with their numbers as well. Whetstone is way down. They have a new first-year coach, Tom Jones. He didn't know he was taking over until late in the spring. They had like 18 kids at practice when I was there. He said like there were 5 to 7 other guys that have been there back and forth, but he wasn't sure how long or how dedicated they were. And they're waiting until the beginning of the school year. They're hoping that some other kids might be interested. And in the city, they just don't have rides during the summer. But if they have somebody, a bus or whatever, taking them to school, now all of a sudden they're there and they can stay there and practice. So that's what they're hoping on. I know Whetstone is pretty down. Centennial, they've got a couple guys back that are pretty interesting on offense. But their problem for the last few years has been defense. They've kind of been like an optional defense, whether or not they want to play any. But their offense, they've got a lot of talented guys, but both of them were speaking very highly of Northland. They both tell me that Northland is loaded, they got numbers, and they've got some real good athletes there.
Why don't we move then over to the City South?
Well, for the City South, the last several years, it's been a very clear pecking order. Marion Franklin, Eastmore, Walnut Ridge, and Independence have always been the top 4, and then the other 4 schools. And I think it'll be something similar to that this year. Walnut Ridge they have several guys that have a lot of looks from colleges. Their quarterback, Isaiah Murphy's back. Julius Wood has lots of offers. He's a great athlete. They've got numbers. They've got a great coaching staff. I mean, they probably have the best. A lot of these old Brookhaven coaches have spread out and they're coaching at different places in the city. Walnut Ridge defensive coordinator Steve Ayers. He was one of the assistant coaches on the 2004 state championship team, like Anthony Thornton was, and Byron Maddox is a very good coach. And then, of course, you got Marion Franklin, and they've got a program over there. The one thing that's like they've got high-level talent in Marion Franklin, just like they almost always do. They don't have the numbers that they've had in some past years. I think they're in the 50s, which is actually pretty good compared to most of the city right now. And they're going to be very competitive. And then Eastmore is they got Savon Edwards back, and they've got an excellent coaching staff too, with Jim Morana, who's been coaching in the city for 2 decades. So I mean that's a great place to start. West has a new coach this year, and BJ Queen, who was at Beechcroft last year. So he's trying to do they might not pass the ball a lot. They're going to run the ball a lot.
After always passing the ball for several years.
Yeah, well, they switched it to the kind of doing like the single wing or something. So, and then Independence, you know that they're going to have a good running back because that's what Maurice Douglas does out there. So, I think you can expect a lot of the same type of results we've seen the last few years in the City South.
Dave, would you like to add something on your alma mater?
Well, I didn't think you were going to mention the Sixers there for a few minutes. No, I know they lost some important people here and there. They had a really nice playoff run last year. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're going to be in the mix again. Now, whether they're going to get to the regional final again, I think that's the level to which they got last year and then met Hartley.
I mean, I think at least 4 of these teams, like combined City North, City South, will make the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And you might have one that makes it a couple of rounds. I think it's very likely this year.
So in the MSL, we do most of our MSL coverage with the MSL Ohio, where we have Grandview, Columbus Academy, Bexley. Who am I forgetting? Whitehall. Frank and Scott cover those teams. There was a 3-way tie for the league title last year. So what do you think, what's going to happen this year?
Well, those same 3 teams, along with Whitehall, Academy, and London, like you said, all 3 returned quite a few players. Whitehall has their quarterback back, who was All-State last year, Raymond Bird, and I know Coach Lightfoot is very high on him, and he has also an All-State linebacker back in Keon Freeman. Again, highly talented defensive player. And a back who was there as a sophomore, who now has returned after 1 year at Groveport, is Wayne Blackshear. And I know Coach Lightfoot, again, is very highly about him. So Whitehall looks like to be one of the top teams in the division again. And Columbus Academy, they lost quite a bit, but Coach Miller likes what he has coming back, led by Dorian Moultrie, who was the younger brother of Herman Moultrie, who's now playing at Georgetown. So both those teams, hopefully, they're hoping to, again, contend for league title.
And Scott, you cover Bexley and Grandview, and Bexley was winless last year after having a perfect regular season the year before. So what's going on with the Lions?
Well, they're still young and learning. They'll be much improved this year under second-year coach Nathan Castorena. They have a second-year quarterback in Anthony Welsh, and they have a running back slash linebacker, Patrick Beck, that looks like he'll mean a lot to the team. Grandview's really interesting. They have a lot of athletes there. And
They have another Lachey.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting to. They have Luke Lachey. He'll be a junior, the youngest son of former Ohio State and NFL lineman Jim Lachey. He's just incredible as a wide receiver and defensive back. Makes circus catches on both sides of the ball. And Hudson Jump, he'll be moving from linebacker to defensive lineman, which will play into his hands, so to speak, because was a 195-pound state champion in Division III in wrestling. He's also going to be a strong running back. Kyle Casey, their quarterback, broke his arm in week 9 last year, and maybe it was week 8. But anyway, he'll be back with another year under his belt, so that should help them out a lot.
I was actually joking the other day with Patrick Dolan, our other copy editor who's not here. I don't know how I'm going to handle editing Grandview stories in the future when we run out of jumps and Lacheys.
You probably never run out of jumps.
Before we move on to the LCL, let me just throw out.
Well, I was going to mention, because of Daniel Van Gur, I want to talk about, ask you guys, him leaving graduating from Harvest Prep, and any other MSL teams you guys wanted to discuss.
Just with the MSL Cardinal, I think Harvest Prep's still the favorite. They've got their quarterback back, Moses Davis, and they got Zion Bangura, who is going to play. He's not like Daniel Bangura. He's more. I think he's going to contribute a lot on offense, and he's a very, very good defensive player. And they've got a system out there. So I would think that they're probably the favorite in the Cardinal. I think Worthington Christian will be improved.
I think, Worthington Christian, being coached by a former NFL player.
Fascinating, right?
I mean, out of all the programs, but I just think that's
Rob Carpenter, Jeff Harding.
Yeah, I just think at Lancaster, Rob Carpenter, Miami University graduate. I just think that has got to be so cool for the kids to be coached by a former NFL player. So we are left then with Lincoln County League, and Scott, why don't we start?
It's got to start with Johnstown.
Yeah, Johnstown.
Wow.
I had kind of forgotten this, but Northridge won 6 games last year.
Yeah, that was the first time they had a winning record since '05. So it really meant a lot for them. And they have a junior linebacker running back named Cole Fox. He's big, physical player. I think the Vikings he will help be a big factor in the Vikings continuing their winning ways. But in the OCC, in the LCL Cardinal, Johnstown just seems to be the favorite. Last year, they were 1-2 basically because they lost. Well, they had 1 starter back on offense and 2 on defense, and it took them a couple games to get rolling. But they have a senior running back, Bryce Barish. He had almost 1,800 yards rushing last year, I believe 24 touchdowns. And Caden Calhoun's back at quarterback. They just have a lot going for them in the system that Mike Carter just keeps churning out players.
What about Jared? You wrote some previews from several of the LCL teams.
Well, in the big division, I still get them mixed up. Is that the Buckeye?
The Buckeye.
That's the Buckeye. I think it starts with Licking Valley and Granville. Those are they've been really good Licking Valley's always good. They had a down season a couple years ago, but that's not the norm. They've got Connor McLaughlin back, and he's an excellent player. He's a great running back, great defensive player, and they got a lineman. He's going to Iowa State, so they know how to produce talent out there. They're going to be a very, very difficult team to deal with, and I think Granville is very intriguing. They've got Cameron Crouch back as their quarterback. They lost their running back, Brandon Haley, back in July. He rushed for 1,400 yards last year. He's out for the season, but I got a feeling that they've got some other guys that could fill in for them. They've got their new coach is named Justin Buttermore, coached Tri-Valley to the state championship game last year, and his son, Bo Buttermore, might end up taking on a real big role in that offense for them. He played a lot last year for Tri-Valley. And then they've got Keegan Van Meter, is also a very good player for them. And I think that's going to be a heck of a battle between those two.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of just to wrap this up. Oh, sorry, Brad. You went Heath?
No, I just wanted to just say about Licking Heights.
Oh, okay.
They're usually traditionally pretty good and in that contention with Licking Valley and Granville. And their coach, Darren Waters, tells me that he thinks Licking Valley's loaded again, even though they lost their quarterback, that they have everybody else back. And Licking Heights, they always have a rotation of tailbacks and things, and they never have a guy that rushes for 12 or 1,400 yards, but they also only get 10 or 15 carries a game. They don't overuse them. They just rotate them in and out. Their big problem this year is they're going to have 5 new offensive linemen. Back is the quarterback, Nate Ryder. He'll be a third-year starter, but whether or not they'll be able to implement much of a passing game, he's just going to wait and find out if that offensive line gels.
So we've been talking for quite a while about lots of teams, lots of players. Before we wrap it up, is there anything you guys want to share? Is there a team that I think when we were doing the Cardinal, we missed Darby. So let's backtrack a minute and give a quick overview on Darby?
Yeah, obviously not a team that you want to overlook. They've been injury plagued the last 2 years, and last year they made it to the playoffs even with all the injuries they had. The good news about that situation is that they have a lot of experience back because they used so many players last year. They've got 2 or 3 really strong players on defense, and they're expected to be right up there. They want to contend with Bradley. Obviously, that's a hometown type of thing in Hilliard. But I also understand that they're going to put the ball in the air a little bit more often, unlike all the other Hilliard teams. It seems like, well, Bradley. Unlike Davidson, yeah. But their game is a lot traditionally like Davidson, but they're going to put the ball up in the air more often this year. Mm-hmm. One thing that they say they're going to do is they're going to be efficient with it. They want to throw when they want to throw, and they're not going to throw the ball 40 yards downfield, most likely an incompletion. They're going to use a control passing game because they still want to control that clock. But yeah, I don't know how we overlook Darby. I think they could be they could contend with Bradley this year in the OCC Cardinal.
I just want to add that it was fascinating last year that Pickerington Central was finally able to break through. And we really weren't all that far from having 2 Central Ohio teams play for the state championship in Division I, if you think about it. I mean, Liberty was pretty close. They've been pretty close the last couple of years. And the fact that the OHSAA split Central Ohio, it makes for some pretty exciting nights for us coming up here, I think. Mm-hmm. So it should be a really exciting season.
Well, and since you mentioned that, after we do Facebook Live next Thursday from Berlin, you're covering a game.
I'm covering games 4 nights in a row.
Yeah. So well, for next Thursday, it's Walnut Ridge and Mifflin.
Yeah.
And we'll have a recap of that at ThisWeekSports.com, and then obviously every Friday night, if you want to go to ThisWeekSports.com, you can follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekSports. We'll be posting scores and stats and all kinds of things, and after the games, we'll have the recaps and videos and a slideshow of our best photos. And then when we have good, Thursday night matchups or a Saturday matchup during the season, we'll be there. So, and then Jared, so for that Saturday, so you're covering Walnut Ridge Mifflin, and then you'll cover a game Friday. So what are your Saturday and Sunday games?
DeSales is playing at Dayton Dunbar on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Dunbar was a playoff team last year. And then Sunday at 12:30, Pickerington Central is playing 12:30. The game's going to be on ESPN, and it's at Otterbein. They're playing a team from Chicago, Illinois that won its state title last year.
Yeah, so
should be an exciting weekend for all of us.
Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I mean,
there's lots of good games at opening Friday too.
I think we all enjoy the Friday nights and covering the games, and doing the social media and just being there.
Making deadline.
Yes. So I think that'll do it for the first podcast of the This Week Sports Roundtable. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back in a few weeks to discuss other fall sports. We're also going, as I mentioned, we're also going to be doing Facebook Live football previews every Thursday afternoon during the season, and we'll announce those locations on Twitter and Facebook a few days before each appearance. But as I mentioned before, Olentangy Berlin next Thursday, 3:30 p.m. As a final reminder, our Central Ohio High School football preview guide will be available next week in your August 19th edition of the Dispatch or your August 23rd edition of This Week. You can also pick one up at Central Ohio Roosters locations. So, for the This Week Sports staff, thanks for joining us.